I have been looking at the history of GDP, which is the way we measure what's happening in the economy.
The history of GDP has really been about can we afford to go to war?
It came about during the Second World War. The governments wanted to know how much they had available to fight the war and what kind of sacrifice consumers were going to have to make to support the war effort. GDP is very familiar, although most people don't actually know what the letters stand for. It adds up all the incomes and all the expenditure and all the production in the economy, and combining all of those things in one number. You can look at how it changes over time, you can compare it to other countries and see what the ranking looks like, and that's a very powerful incentive to get people to do things.
GDP, which our politicians and economists fixate upon, is a measure of the flow of income. Now, you as an individual probably don't assess your prosperity by looking at 1 month's earnings. You'll look at the debt you need to cover, the value of your savings and pensions, your ability to rely on your community to interact and prosper. If you're a forward-looking company, you won't just look at a quarter's earnings. You'll look at the value of your buildings, your people, and your ideas in generating profits in the future. So it's strange that at the national and at the international level, we tend to fixate only on flows of GDP, almost to the complete neglect of measuring the value of all the wealth that surrounds us.
How we measure the economy now with GDP, there are all kinds of assets that we're using without properly accounting for it, and therefore we don't know if they'll be there for future generations.
Boosting GDP has brought about massive reductions in child mortality, massive reductions in deaths from preventable diseases. But the problem is that it's also created, in the process, some pretty big environmental problems. It's created some pretty big issues of inequality.
Obviously, measuring social and natural capital is not going to be easy, but it seems staggering that we make practically no effort at all. And indeed, imputing zero into our calculus of those forms of assets is clearly going to lead us into serious risks and uncertainties.
We are looking at a balance sheet for the country, as well as knowledge about what income and consumption is in any period of time. And the purpose of doing that is that if you don't have a balance sheet, you've got no sense of sustainability. You don't know if you're eating the future for today's consumption.
Our measurement of prosperity really needs to include the damages to these immense sources of our future well-being and indeed our future survival.
So we might try to think about putting a value on all of these different kinds of assets that we're looking at on the balance sheet. So you might see that income is going up, but the stock of assets that we use is going down, and you understand that trade-off better if you have two numbers and not one number.
But where along a global supply chain should we actually attribute the liability?
When we're assessing the value of our assets, the value of our wealth, we need to make a judgment on the stream of benefits that those assets will generate in the future. And that means you have to encompass expectations. But the fact that we have to deal with the future means that sustainability is embodied in wealth in a way that it isn't with GDP.